Welcome to the Play Podcast with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello, and welcome to episode 78 of the Play Podcast, where we explore the greatest new and classic plays. I'm Douglas Schatz, founder and host of the Play Podcast. I'm excited to say that we have a double bill on the program in our episode today. Two short plays written by Harold Pinter back in the early 1960s, when his fame was very much on the ascendant. So, having taken our seats for the first half, the curtain rises on the tastefully furnished living room of a detached house near Windsor in southeast England. Sarah, wearing a crisp, demure dress, is dusting. Her husband, Richard, enters, collects his briefcase, and kisses his wife on the cheek. Before he departs for work in the city, he amiably asks her, "Is your lover coming today?" This may not be a conventional marriage after all. Or perhaps it is, for Pinter's short play, The Lover, may partly intend to suggest that sexual intrigue is a common and necessary ingredient in a healthy marriage. The games that the lovers in question play do in fact seem to sustain Richard and Sarah's marriage in a surprising way. Pinter's biographer, the theater critic Michael Billington, described The Lover as an absolute gem, one of the most candid and revealing plays about sex in the English language. It was first written for TV and broadcast in March 1963, before being staged at the Arts Theatre in London in September that year, both productions starring Pinter's then-wife, Vivian Merchant, as Sarah. The second play we'll talk about today is The Collection, written in fact a year earlier than The Lover, but which also explores the impact of apparent adultery, in this case on the relationships of two couples. All of the parties involved come to promote different versions of events, such that they and we are left uncertain as to what the truth might be. The Collection was also first written and presented as a television play in May 1961, and then produced on stage by the Royal Shakespeare Company in London, which Pinter co-directed with Peter Hall in June 1962. This marked the beginning of their important partnership, as Hall would go on to direct many of Pinter's plays over the following 2 decades. Following the premiere production of The Collection, the Financial Times described the play as an underpraised little masterpiece, and there have been a number of notable productions since, including a 1976 TV version with the extraordinary cast of Laurence Olivier, Alan Bates, Helen Mirren, and Malcolm McDowell. Pinter himself appeared in a production in 1998 at the Donmar Warehouse in London. And as we record this episode, a new production offering a double bill of both of the plays has just opened at the Theatre Royal in Bath, directed by Lindsay Posner and with David Morrissey leading the cast. And I'm delighted to welcome Lindsay back to the podcast to talk about these two small gems. Welcome, Lindsay. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you again.
Loyal listeners will recall that Lindsay joined me to help pay homage to Michael Frayn's comic masterpiece Noise is Off in episode 58, when he directed the 40th anniversary production of the play last year in Bath, the West End, and on tour. Lindsay's list of directing credits reads like the dream catalog of the Play Podcast, including most recently production in Bath of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and A View from the Bridge, which has also just arrived at the Theatre Royal Haymarket in London's West End, with Dominic West as the tortured Eddie Carbone. Lindsay is also about to start rehearsing Terence Rattigan's The Deep Blue Sea in Bath. If we hadn't already covered all of these favorites on the podcast, I would be peppering Lindsay constantly with invitations to come back to talk about these plays. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for accepting this invitation and making time between shows to talk about Pinter. So, my first question is, why did you want to put on these two plays together just now? What about them do you think speaks to our time, and why put them together as a pair?
Well, I've always been a fan of Pinter's work, and having directed The Birthday Party and The Caretaker. And I read these again recently, and my interest in them coincided with the fact that David Morrissey was keen for an acting challenge on stage, and I sent him both plays. And he loved them both and wanted to play the double of Harry and Richard. So it was a combination of me loving Pinter and the synchronicity of the actor wanting to do them that turned this into a production. I think Pinter's, first of all, the elegance of his writing in the tradition of Wilde and Noel Coward is unsurpassed, really. And it's very interesting when you study Pinter and explore it during rehearsals, how you can see that he has been influenced by Noel Coward. For example, in the collection, some of the conversations between James and Bill could easily be Coward writing in the 1960s.
Yeah, there's a bit of an air of private lives, isn't there?
There is. And he also learnt, I suspect, the art of the dramatic curtain line, which happens both in The Lover and all the way through the collection, which again is one of Noel Coward's trademarks.
Yes. There are two plays, as Michael Billington said, I guess, about sex as well. What is it about that Pinter was writing about that at that time?
I think in the 60s, Pinter was keen to subvert conventional ideas about sexuality, even though that, in some ways it was regarded as a period of liberation, but he was more interested in the repressed and suppressed bourgeois mentality, which liberated sexualities in rather unusual ways. And I think here he shows the darkness, particularly in The Lover, that lies beneath the conventional bourgeois middle-class life, and indeed the tragedy. The plot of the play is very much a domestic home counties just outside London middle-class couple where the wife is a housewife and doesn't appear to be doing any job, and the husband works in the city. What you get from the text is that she has initiated that they act out a fantasy sexual role during the day, where the husband pretends to be Max, who's a rougher, tougher character, and satisfies various almost sadomasochistic desires in both of them. And there are unspoken rules, well, actually not unspoken, they've articulated rules where they can't talk about certain things when he comes home in the evening, having visited her as someone else in the day. And these rules get broken by the husband as he starts. It seems that he's reached a crisis point where, weirdly, almost schizophrenically, he's become jealous of himself and feels that his wife appreciates the lover character that he's playing rather than himself. And he loses a real sense of identity. And that's really interesting in the play, I think, and beautifully articulated by Pinter.
Yes, that was a great summary, actually, setting up what happens in The Lover. And inevitably, for those who don't know the plays, there's going to be spoilers, I'm afraid, in our discussion today. So if you haven't been to Bath yet, you could stop listening now and come back later. But otherwise, we're going to plow on. As you say, they spend their afternoons in this sexual role-playing, and the evenings revert to the bourgeois couple from the home counties. I had it in Virginia Water. I don't know why that seems...
Right. I mean, that's very possible.
It is near Windsor.
Yes.
But it is, as you say, that bourgeois life. It's interesting, though, that both of these plays feature strong women characters whose sexual desire unnerves the men in some way.
Yeah.
And it is about sex outside marriage to some degree as well. And I wondered whether Pinter's interest might come from the fact that I believe he had embarked on his own secret affair around this time with Joan Bakewell. So he was exploring, as you say, some of the suppressed things that go on in conventional marriage.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, it's interesting that some commentators more recently have accused some of the writing in Pinter's plays as being misogynistic.
Yeah.
Which I don't really agree with at all. I think if you look at The Lover, it's clear that by the end of the play, it's the wife who's empowered. And it's the wife who can find stability in the route she's chosen to take and to keep her marriage alive and harmonious. And it's actually the husband who's cracked up as a result of it. And indeed, Pinter writes an expose of male fear and male attitudes to women. And it's exactly the same in the collection. You get the same phenomenon happening.
Yes, as you do in The Homecoming, which we've covered recently on the podcast and which followed relatively shortly after these two plays. Again, a very strong central female character who has a sexual power that unnerves the men.
Yes.
And yes, we can talk at some length about how he treads that fine line between misogyny or the kind of stereotypical sexual roles that might even cross into male fantasy at times he's been accused of, I think.
Yeah.
But I think there's an irony in there as well, isn't there?
I think there is. And I think it's the male figures who are being satirized or critiqued rather than the female ones.
Yes, indeed. It seems to be their neurosis that come out in these plays. I wanted to ask you about the form to start with, because I think we've given this a bit away, of course, but it very cleverly, The Lovers starts as a sort of modern drawing room sex comedy where there's humor in the contrast between the apparent civility of their lives, as we described, and then this unexpectedly frank conversations about her lover. And we may even expect some sort of farcical sex comedy plot constructions to follow.
Yeah.
But then there's this twist, right, that you've described, where initially Pinter leads us to believe there is a third party, that Sarah has a lover that he approves of or allows. When then, of course, he appears as the lover in role play. And that changes the whole tone of the thing and our expectations. And we are forced to then recalibrate, aren't we, as to what's going on?
Yes, we are. And Pinter teases us along the way with the arrival of a milkman as well, which is a classic carry-on sex comedy notion. While she's waiting for her lover, the milkman turns up. And at first, the audience think that is supposed to be the lover. And again, that's subverted.
I was going to ask you, how many do you think in the audience who do not know the play see the twist coming? Do you think anyone does?
I don't think they do. And I've sensed that at first they felt that David Morrissey was playing two separate characters.
Oh, wow, really?
Until they started to realize through the, obviously the dialogue tells us what's happening. But at first they didn't quite get it.
That never occurred to me because, of course, I knew what was coming, I'm afraid. But my neighbors sitting next to me in the theater certainly didn't see the twist coming. I don't know whether they thought he was a different character. I think by the time we spoke at the interval, they'd worked out that he was the same guy. But it takes a turn, doesn't it? It becomes much deeper and darker as a result.
It does. And it's interesting. What I find fascinating is the way the characters, when their insecurities are expressed on both sides, they still remain almost totally within the rules of the game. Although the rules are being broken, they still play the game and talk about the lover as if it was a real person and the situation was real.
Yes, that's another point of the form, isn't it? As they carry on, it's difficult to decipher whose voice they're speaking in.
Yeah.
Because they each talk about their real-life counterparts in the characters of the lovers. At times, though, you feel like they're speaking truthfully as themselves, as their real selves. And it adds layers to this relationship that challenges to work out what is going on between them.
Yeah.
Are they speaking as themselves, or is this still a game?
Yes. And ever so often, something new is introduced from left field, usually by Richard, which disarms her for a moment, but then she still manages to work the game. For example, when he talks about, I want to split up because of the children. And it's clear in the writing that they have no children. So he's introduced that and it throws her and she tries to work out what his real agenda is, which she does work out. She uses the game to, in the end, pacify and empower herself and pacify him.
Yes, and he is making real points about what he really wants, but in the voice of the character and in the games playing. That one, for example, is clearly a game playing because they do not have children.
Yeah.
But he's already made the point when he asks her whether her husband has a problem with her infidelity with him. And Sarah says he doesn't mind, and Max says, doesn't he? I'm beginning to mind. And it's that pronoun, I'm beginning to mind, that throws her.
Yeah.
Right? She says, what did you say? As you said, she's slightly discomfited. Is he in character? Has he dropped out of character? Who's speaking here?
Yeah. And she perceives that he's using the game and role-playing in order to try and destroy it, to destroy the thing she needs to keep her marriage alive.
Exactly, because initially he seems to enjoy the whole setup. He's smiling when he asks her if her lover is coming today. But then increasingly, he gets more unhappy with it, it seems, right?
Yes.
Even initially, when she says he's coming again the next day, he starts to look overworked even and having to come back 2 days in a row. It does feel like she's driving it and he wants it to stop. Is that right?
I think that is right. And he's reached a crisis point where, I mean, one should assume that, their marriage wasn't sterile, but perhaps their sexual life became perfunctory. And she introduced the idea, this slightly wacky role-playing idea. Well, I say wacky, but I think lots of people role-play probably to an extent in private. And I think he's not put up with it, but probably it satisfied him as well for a while. But then he started to worry and have an identity crisis as a result of it.
Yes. Don't they have different ideas about what the sex means and who they are? I mean, it seems to me that he has a problem reconciling the two beings that he's performing.
Yes.
The lover and the husband. And she has less problem with being the wife and the whore, as he describes her.
Yes.
And how she behaves as the lover. He's not entirely comfortable with that. He sees them very separate. And she feels like actually the balance works. She literally says that, doesn't she, somewhere?
That's absolutely right. And she's mature enough to realize when the game is being played and when it's not. He's started to become confused, I think.
Yes. And he, as you say, he literally feels like he's been usurped somehow.
Yes.
Because he's not actually got a relationship with who he thinks his wife is.
No, and there's no sense that when they revert to their bourgeois norms in the evening, there's no sense that they actually have a sexual life then. So it seems that the sex only exists in the role-playing when he's being somebody else. And I think that adds to his confusion.
That's right, because he talks about her in social terms all the time, and that he loves her and talks about how beautiful and gracious she is, but also about how proud he is to be seen with her on his arm out to dinner at the theater or locally. And he says this life of debauchery has to stop. And he even lays claim to this being my house. Your rightful place is as the wife. And he even goes to the point where he's upset that dinner is not being cooked for him.
That's right. I mean, he deliberately adopts the kind of Victorian patriarchal identity of a kind of a Torvald in the doll's house and uses appropriate language to provoke her and unsettle her.
Yes. But there's a part of him also that's, is there an element of self-disgust? There's an extraordinary speech when he says that he wants to ban her lover from the house. He tells her to get rid of him. He tells her to take him out into the fields, find a ditch or a slag heap, find a rubbish dump. And he's talking about himself.
He is. Or at least he's talking about the fantasy that needs to go. I don't think he's quite worked out for himself what's going to happen once he destroys that. Because I think his intention towards the end is to break her and stop that. But I don't think he quite knows what will happen afterwards. And he's scared of that.
Why does he get so angry with her? It turns quite vicious.
It is. And I think it's all to do with feeling the need to violate because he's frightened of what they've become. But then she takes the reins and transforms it for him.
Yes, because she is desperate, as you suggested. She really wants it to continue. She's comfortable with it.
Yes.
She says at one time she has a far richer time than he does.
That's right. And in one sense, she has the more mature mind than him.
Yes, because she's able to reconcile these things.
Yeah, and she can see it for exactly what it is.
And retain it simultaneously. She doesn't actually pretend. She acknowledges, she knows that it's really still him, whereas he can't seem to merge the two people he is and she is. She also then says that she doesn't think they can have what we have as lovers if she's only his decorous wife.
That's right.
So as you say, what would follow if they don't do this?
Yeah, their marriage would probably come apart.
Yes.
But she finds a new solution.
Yes, well, it's close to not. She gets increasingly distressed by his attempts to break down the barrier and to destroy the whole thing.
And then the moment where she sees how she can twist the agenda.
Yeah, so what happens is he comes at her quite aggressively to try and blow the whole thing up. And it's unclear. It seems like he might be playing a game again, but he means it. I think we're pretty clear he means it, aren't we, Lindsay?
I think we absolutely are by then.
And she is as well.
She knows that. And she crucially says, think of what you're doing. And then she turns it. She sets a new rule and a new boundary for the game to be played.
Yeah, so she turns the attack into a new game and attempts to seduce him. And again, the important bit is this is in the evening now. Their arrangement, as you said, has been very strictly controlled so that their role playing is only during the daytime. And by 6 o'clock, and in your production is a lovely detail, the chimes of the clock going every night at 6 o'clock when he returns from his life in the city or wherever he's been. He's actually not been there. But this last scene is happening after that watershed, so to speak. And initially, they don't want that to be the case, but she decides this has got to continue. And she's kneeling over him. She says, "Would you like me to change?" By that, she means change her clothes, because she actually changes her clothes in her role playing, right, Lindsay?
So for the first time, she created a scenario where they can role play in the evenings. And she says, as if he's Mac, the lover, she says, "You don't normally wear clothes like this suit and this tie. Take off your jacket. And would you like me to change?" Meaning into her sexy dress. They're role playing. And he succumbs to that.
It's fascinating, the last few words that he says and the rhythm with which they unfold.
Yeah.
Because he says, yes, change, change, change your clothes, you lovely whore. How do you interpret those repeated changes, particularly the pauses in between? What's going on in his mind as he says these things?
I think he's realizing that he's surrendering to her power here, and that there's a new window that's been opened for him to keep things going, because there's a new stimulus and a new spice that she's created, and he surrenders himself for her. And it's interesting, "you lovely whore" is tricky now, because the word whore has more negative and perhaps alienating connotations for us as used, well, if used at all now, but I think he's actually celebrating their relationship.
That's interesting. You think he's celebrating rather than somehow resigned and forced into.
He certainly resigned, but he's clearly aroused by the idea.
Yeah, he is. And in the performance, David Moore's performance, I think there's no doubt he's in sexual thrall at that moment.
Yeah.
So he, as you say, he gives in as a reversion to the game, his last line calling her a whore, because he's referred to her that way before.
Yes.
So he does seem to exceed. It does feel like a victory of hers.
It does. And it feels as though the game is going to continue in a different form for a while. Whether that will last, who knows?
Did you mention at the beginning that there's tragedy in this?
Well, it's tragic in that there is a pathos at the end, insofar as neither of them can actually function without the role play.
Yes. In fact, a couple of times, he and she, they refer to being trapped.
Yeah.
That really rang out to me, that they're both trapped in the need for this game playing.
Yes.
And I thought that the end, again, we're going back to the similarities of these women, the ending reminded me also of The Homecoming, which was to follow, because the stage direction is they are still kneeling, she leaning over him with some literal power, it seems.
Yeah. But this in some ways is a prototype of the Homecoming scenario, where the woman becomes all-powerful dominatrix, mother and whore at the same time. And it's a similar thing. She's mothering Richard in a way. On several occasions, when she talks about, "let me whisper to you," she suddenly becomes maternal towards him. And that's clearly part of the fantasy as well. They have their tea time moment under the table where they have sex, but they also have whispering time where he loves being soothed and aroused, listening to her whisper to him in his ear, which obviously is an infantilization image.
Tea time. You couldn't get a more English euphemism, could you?
No, and Pinter's very specific about having, the teapot laid over the table under which they have sex.
We talked briefly about the pauses there and his repeated use of the word change. And I wondered whether one interpretation might be that he wants to change. He doesn't want this to go on as it is, as opposed to her just change her clothes and go back into the game. Actually, I'd rather you changed in a larger way, that this whole arrangement changes, that we don't do this. Is that one possible interpretation?
It is. I mean, what we played is that he was asking her to change her clothes and allow the audience to make that other interpretation. I mean, what's really interesting with Pinter in all of Pinter's plays, the collection especially, is that with actors, you have to make character decisions and you have to make decisions about what they're playing at any one time. For example, in the collection, you never really know whether Stella's story, whether she has slept with Bill in Leeds or not, or whether she's told the truth or whether she's told a lie for whatever reason. But the actors have to decide what's true and what isn't. And what's interesting about Pinter is that you could play either scenario and make the decision on either side of that coin, but it will still be the same in performance, even though you're playing that, because Pinter's built ambivalence into the dialogue.
I was going to say there is definitely ambivalence all over the place in these plays.
Yeah, but in a way, that always takes care of itself. The actors need to make a decision about what's true and what's not, or they wouldn't be able to perform the play.
That's fascinating. I mentioned the pauses in these last words, and of course, Pinter is famous for these pauses and the precision of his language, as you're saying. And there's a wonderful story I read, actually occurred during the rehearsal for the collection, I believe. At one point, Pinter stopped Michael Hordern, who played Harry originally, and said, "Michael, I wrote ... and you're giving me ...
Yes.
Were you giving similar notes?
I was actually. In some ways, people laugh at that, and think it might be a bit pretentious, but it's not, because pauses and beats in his play need to be filled with thought. You have to treat them like dialogue, except they're unspoken, and you have to know exactly what you're thinking in each pause, or, in bad productions of Pinter, the pause is dead, it's nothing. But it's also a lot to do with the musical rhythm in the language. It's very musically structured, and if you get the musical structure wrong, it jars either conspicuously for the audience or subliminally to the audience. And that's why, in some ways, those dots are like musical notation, and you have to treat them as such.
That's fascinating. I did read, as you say, that Pinter did say that in those pauses there is thought. And that's why I came back to the ending of The Lover and the pauses between change, as to whether Richard is wrestling with his response to Sarah in terms of the options.
Yes, I think the first beat was that he's wrestling, and then the second beat is that he becomes enthralled and surrenders through those.
Yeah, that was clear to me from the performance. So now, listeners, imagine that the interval is finished. You've had your ice cream or glass of bubbly and returned to your seat for the start of the second half of our double bill. The curtain rises on the separate living rooms of two London homes. On one half of the stage is the elegant period furnishing of Harry's house in Belgravia. On the other, the tasteful contemporary decor of James's flat in Chelsea. Upstage between the two is a telephone box in which a figure with his back to us is dimly lit. The phone in Harry's house is ringing. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. When Harry answers it, the caller asks for his housemate, Bill, who Harry reports is asleep. The caller does not identify himself before he rings off. The next day, James, the night caller, appears at Harry's house looking for Bill. Although Bill doesn't know him, James accuses him of sleeping with his wife, Stella, when they were both at a conference in Leeds the previous week. So begins a round robin of sexual truths, untruths, and rivalries in the collection. Lindsay, I wonder, do we need to tell the listeners more about what unfolds in this plot?
I think it's worth saying that Stella and James, that they're a couple who have been married for 2 years. We don't quite know whether the marriage has been a vital one or whether it's in a crisis, but for a reason, ambivalent reason, Stella has decided to tell James that she had a one-night stand with a dress designer while she was in Leeds on a fashion convention. It may be the truth, what she told him, or it may not be the truth. It might be, and we discussed all sorts of scenarios here, perhaps she's realised that he's gay and she wanted to see if she could throw a bomb in the works to see if that actually materialises. Or maybe it's because the marriage was becoming sterile or they weren't communicating and she felt she needed to make a dirty protest. That's the lie version. The truth version would be that she wanted to tell him that it was a one-off horrible error in her life that she made and she apologizes. which is what she ostensibly did to him. And if that was the truth, what we then see is that it unleashes an extreme insecurity in him and a relationship that develops that verges on the homoerotic. That's probably all we need to know in terms of the plot.
Yes. As you say, why Stella tells James that this has occurred. Has she made it up? If it didn't happen, why would she do that? Why would she incriminate herself? As you say, there's some possibilities about stirring things up between them, potentially. If it did happen, there is some suggestion at some points that she was reluctant. She told Jimmy that she didn't enjoy it, that she resisted.
Yeah.
It could be that she really did resist and was unhappy and it was non-consensual and she's upset and sorry. And she's also sorry. As you say, ostensibly she apologizes. But he is definitely aggrieved, hurt, angry, feels betrayed, I think, because he reacts quite viciously to her.
Yeah.
He then goes round to where Bill lives with Harry. So Bill and Harry are a couple. He is an older man who says he found Bill in a slum and gave him a job and a roof. So we have a dynamic in that relationship as well, which is worth exploring. And when James comes round to Bill's, he's angry. He wants, I don't know what kind of retribution he wants or what he wants to come out of that encounter. But the play feels like a series of battles between these characters within the couples and without the couples, where they use whatever version of the story that happened in Leeds as a weapon. And there's more meaning in the subtext of their dialogue than, in fact, what they're saying. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is. When I worked with Pinter when he was still alive on the birthday party, he felt very strongly that people can't ultimately verify the truth about anything. That in the end, you don't know whether anything you're told is true. And he really believed that. I'm not sure about that myself, but it is clearly written in many of his plays, the collection being the classic example of that. And crucially, what's important for him in the collection is the insecurity that's unleashed by not knowing what's true, and the power dynamics where people can use stories in order to exploit others with them.
Yes, I thought it was more significant, as you say, is to observe how they manipulate the story and what's going on in the subtext between them.
Yeah.
Because actually, I don't think we are able to ever verify what happened. And the characters don't seem to be willing to be truthful about it either.
They're not. I mean, we made the decision ourselves that Stella was telling the truth and that she was genuinely apologetic. We could equally have made the decision that she was lying. And of course, when you lie, you try and lie convincingly. So when you perform that role, it comes out the same anyway. So there aren't different ways of interpreting the performance based on the decision you make about what's true or not. That's what I mean. It's kind of irrelevant. It's just that the actors need to do it. But the audience will always get the same performance, whether we've made the decision that she lied or she told the truth. The audience will receive the same performance.
Well, there is that moment where she seems to be sorry, but also that she gets very upset when he's attacking her.
Yes.
And tries to say it was something, but not really anything. Can we move on?
Well, maybe, but she could be lying and just being convincing about that. And at the end, when he says, this is what happened, nothing happened, did it? She doesn't answer. She just smiles sympathetically at his insecurities, but she never gives him the answer.
No, we'll come to the enigmatic ending, what that means. And you're saying about how each of them manipulate the story. Can we talk about each of these characters and how they react? Starting with Harry, I mentioned the dynamic of their relationship. And he seems threatened, doesn't he, by Bill's having a relationship elsewhere. You see Stella and even James as a potential threat, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. I mean, Harry, we get the sense when he talks about finding Bill in a slum, we decided that there's an element of truth in that Bill could have been a male prostitute as a teenager, some kind of rent boy, and that Harry, upper class gay man, living in the late 50s, early 60s, it would have been very difficult to express his sexuality, so that he may have paid for sex, gone round to a bed sit, seen this boy, that actually there were some rather interesting paintings, and he works in the art world as an art dealer, and decided to possibly fall in love with him and take this boy in. Whether there was love involved, we're not sure. But nevertheless, it does feel as though he's given the boy a life and a job and expensive clothes and a posher accent.
Yes, he's keeping him. You have a sense he's keeping him, don't you?
Yes, you do, totally. And in return, well, you don't get the sense that they necessarily have sex anymore, but in return, the boy does behave as his house slave, really, and gives him breakfast and looks after him and looks after the house.
Yes, and Harry's very controlling about that. As you say, there is that expectation that Bill's going to serve him the breakfast.
Yes, and also at the same time, Bill's got an innate insolence, which clearly must have attracted Harry, but is also a sense that forms an alienation for him. And he's very insecure because it's probably the case that Bill is off having bisexual one-night stands and relationships over the decade or more that they've been living together. And so he's always jealous and paranoid about him.
I was going to say, I think there's a very strong sense that this is not the first time, isn't it?
Yes, very much.
I mean, there's this extraordinary speech Harry makes where he describes Bill, his lover, as a slum slug and calls him putrid. And that this slum slug crawls all over the walls of nice houses, leaving slime. And he resents having to bail him out of trouble, smooth things out, as he says. It's obviously happened before that he has to do this.
Yes. And it's been a kind of entrapment for him. For Harry, it's clearly a terrible, terrible grievance, and he feels trapped in that paranoia. So he's both frustrated and angry with Bill and angry with himself that he's in a situation that he can't break out of because he's addicted to it and enslaved to it.
That's well put. What about the scenes between Bill and James? They are fascinating, unsettling in tone, some funny but odd and loaded with menace at times.
Yes, they are. You get a sense that we asked the question why James does this in the first, it's a peculiar thing to phone someone in the middle of the night. He could have just rung on the doorbell. So he phones deliberately to unsettle. So there's a perverse need to disarm this person and find out exactly what happened with his wife.
Yeah.
Or try to. But what he finds, the two characters find that they have a lot in common in terms of a ironic, witty perspective of life. And they make a kind of immediate connection once they get talking. And you get the sense that they genuinely are attracted to one another in a sexual way and that they have this rapport.
At the same time as being quite antagonistic and aggressive.
Yes, because of the fact or otherwise of what's happened with Stella.
Why does Bill wind James up so much when he does? I mean, initially he denies everything, wants to calm it all down, but then he goes with it. And in fact, he does more than that. He winds him up. He says, your wife must have known she was married too. She must have found me terribly attractive. And then he goes on even more when he says, every woman is bound to have an outburst of wild sensuality at one time or another, even though it may be the kind of sensuality which you yourself have never been the fortunate recipient. He sticks the knife in, doesn't he?
He does. And again, it's all to do with people sensing vulnerability in others. These two characters both like to exploit that. And there's a dynamic power play going on. I mean, in some ways, Bill's the strongest character in the play. He's insolent, amoral, and enjoys exploiting vulnerability. He clearly does it with Harry as well as James when he comes to visit.
Yes. I mean, there is some suggestion, as you say, of attraction between them, is there not?
Yes, I think there is a physical attraction between them.
There's some reference, I think Billington cites, to a triangular desire between them that originates from their both being attracted to or even had sex with the same woman, Stella.
Yeah.
So if you start looking for signs of a homosexual flirtation between them, then some of the language seems pretty coded that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of coded, I bet you're a wow at parties. And then they both look at a mirror together and kind of silently flirt with their mutual images.
Yes, and also James tells Stella that Bill is an opera fan and then says, I'm a bit of an opera fan myself, always kept it a dead secret.
Yes, so that he's subtextually suggesting that he might be gay to her. And then he said, you've opened up a whole new world for me.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's pretty clearly coded.
Yeah.
And I think Harry certainly fears that James may be a sexual threat as well, doesn't he?
Totally, and he needs to get rid of James, and that's why he needs to dispel this story that Stella has dropped as a bomb.
Exactly. And so why does James believe Harry's account that Stella would make up a story that incriminated herself?
We don't know if James is believing him. What we do know is that James is humouring him.
Ah, okay.
And then he hears the opposite account at the end of the play from Bill, who says, they did meet, but nothing happened. Harry's story was that, which is a lie, is that Stella made the whole thing up. She didn't say that at all to him. What she said was James made it up. So everybody's lying.
So then the other question, why does Bill do that at that point? Because he could, there was a way out. He initially could just agree with Harry's account that Stella made it all up, but Bill won't do that.
I think it's because Bill can't resist putting one final spanner in the works to unsettle him.
To unsettle Harry.
Well, no, to unsettle both.
Yes, because he's just been humiliated in the slug speech.
That's right.
By Harry. So I think he's wanting...
He gets revenge on both of them.
He does, yes. It's interesting to think about Stella's part in all of this. She's certainly a catalyst for the action of the play, although she may, am I right in thinking that she may have the smallest part?
She does. She lives a rather isolated, lonely world, we see, even though she works with her husband. There's a lot of moments where we see her lying on a sofa alone with a cat. And there's a sense of loneliness and isolation in her life, which may in some ways reflect what's been happening in their marriage. And indeed, at the end, Pinter asks for a lighting silhouette on all four characters in isolation, in the sense that they're all kind of trapped in a kind of loneliness and in an inability to truthfully, properly communicate with each other.
It's interesting that, yes, that idea that the marriage was unhappy already.
That's the decision we made, that there was an unhappiness in the marriage, and that's what led to her having this kind of moment, this impulse to have a one-night stand. But of course, the opposite scenario is equally valid if you want to go there with it. It's a choice.
Okay, and both of those would work with the ending of the play then.
Yes.
When what happens is that James comes back from having this confrontation with Bill and Harry and the various stories, and it's left with Bill's story that they only talked when they met in Leeds, talked about what they would do in the room, which is interesting in itself as well, because in a sense that amounts to a form of infidelity if that's really what they were doing, doesn't it?
It does, yes. I suppose if one can read it by degrees, it's not a consummated idea, but absolutely it's an infidelity.
But in the way that Bill delivers it, it feels like it is a bit of that to both James and Harry, I think.
Yes. James has got the male sensibility of an affair is only an affair if you've had sex. That's the infidelity.
But he comes back to Stella and he says to her, okay, so you only talked, right? And he looks for her to affirm that, and she does not corroborate. She says nothing. And the accompanying stage direction is Stella looks at him, neither confirming nor denying. Her face is friendly, sympathetic. What does that signify, do you think, of her reaction?
I think in either scenario, if what James is saying is true, or if what she had originally told him about the affair is true, what she has witnessed is an unleashing of her husband's insecurity to an extreme, crazy degree, and to the point where she feels sorry for him and can objectify him as a man. And I think she feels sorry for the situation he psychologically put himself in. At the same time, it's given her a power and confirmed all sorts of things about their marriage to her.
Yes, I wonder about the future.
It's probably quite bleak.
Yes, because it seems like, again, there's a sort of superiority in her reaction. Why she doesn't accede to his request and just go along with it. She retains some power by not doing so.
I think so. I don't think it's a positive image at the end. It's a rather desperate image. If what he's saying was true and she could have confirmed it, then he would have said, why the hell did you do that? Why did you make up that story?
Yes.
And they could have had, a mature conversation in front of a relate therapist, but that's clearly not what's going to happen.
No, it's again, it's interesting. It's about how they manipulate each other, right? Because Stella and Bill, one assumes, know whether they met or not and what happened or not, and they choose to use the story to manipulate their partners in some form.
Yes, that's right. And again, it's about power again. And unfortunately, Harry is left devastated in the other house.
Yes, because I guess Bill continues to exercise some statement of freedom, doesn't he? Isn't that?
Yeah, and Harry is still trapped. And Bill, in a way, is, he exercises that freedom, but he's still trapped within the confines of that male marriage that he's in.
Yes, where he's being kept, presumably, as well, as we said.
Yeah. And also, he's aware of Harry's insecurities and how Harry has just humiliated him from desperation and exasperation.
It also seems as if the women in both of these plays are the stronger in the sexual partnerships.
It does.
And that there's a through line connecting Stella, Sarah, and Ruth in the Homecoming.
Yes.
Women whose confident sexuality gives them this power over men, but also some degree enigmatic, unknowable.
Yeah.
Perhaps therefore untamable. Going back to the beginning, do you think Pinter's view of female and male sexuality is on display in these plays is dated now? The stereotype of whore and wife, for example, we talked about.
I do. I think to an extent one could say that it is dated, but that it has a lot of kind of retro entertainment value for us.
Well, it certainly does, but I wonder whether the behaviors are also still recognizable.
I think obviously insecurity is still recognizable and the jealousies involved, and clearly the power dynamics are all recognizable.
Yes. Some of the framing, I suppose, socially is different, of course.
It's different. And also the gender language is different. So what would have been funny or shocking then just either feels dated or slightly alienating now in some ways.
Yes. And there is very much a sort of stereotypical, as we said, where he may be doing it ironically, but the male view of the woman as the whore, using that word.
Yes.
Great. Well, very interesting to go back to these two little gems, and also for what was coming, to see, as you said, the way he uses language, the ambivalence in all of that, the uncertainty of truth, the sexual compulsions, and the menace between the power games between characters. All these are part of work that's still to come.
That's right. And it ought to be said that actors love acting Pinter because he's such a theatrical writer. I mean, even though these are originally television plays, the language is theatrical. And actors love it. They love it for its music and they love it for the way they can empower themselves through language in his plays. I think actors find very exciting.
Well, isn't it very exciting to have things that are underneath what's actually being said, to be able to play subtext?
Yes.
And power or vulnerability, and deciphering the language in order to understand what that subtext is. And some of it's, as you say, the language is quite artificial at times, or some slightly weird, crazy things said.
Yeah, I mean, in The Lover, for example, you do feel, I mean, this is where you feel it's a young play in The Lover, because you can feel sometimes Pinter's authorial voice, his own love of language comes through slightly at the expense of character, in the sense that, Richard speaks wonderfully articulately about the nature of a whore or how beautiful his wife is. He launches into a literary speech. And you kind of wonder where that man who says he works in the city gets that facility from.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's Pinter's facility that you're listening to.
Yes, but there's also some quite exotic images and
There is.
references come out of nowhere that seem a little bit absurd even, don't they?
Yeah, in the collection in particular, there's the whole description about the man who knocked on the door last night with one leg.
Yes.
Which is a very strange flight of fancy.
Yes, unsettling.
Yeah.
Great. Lindsay, thank you so much. Before I let you go, you may recall that one of the traditions of the podcast, I like to ask my guest for another play to recommend that we might do on the podcast, or just a personal favorite.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't done it already, it's about to be revived soon, and that's People, Places and Things by Duncan Macmillan. And I loved that play when I saw it. I found it very moving and very raw.
Yes, I would love to do that. And yes, I do remember it as well, being very disturbing and a fantastic performance as well.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, before we go, Lindsay's production of The Lover and the Collection continues at the Theatre Royal Bath until the 20th of April. And if you'd like to hear more about Pinter, we have episodes on the next major play that followed The Collection, The Lover, The Homecoming, and on his later play about adultery, Betrayal, both of which continue his exploration of sexual deceit and rivalry. Thank you again, Lindsay. No doubt, given your choices of wonderful plays, I might see you again.
Hopefully. Thank you very much.
As the curtains fall on Pinter's two short plays about sex, how do we evaluate the results of the couple's maneuverings? What are the prospects for their future relationships? I think we can only conclude that weaponizing truth is a dangerous game. Thanks for listening. See you next time. There are additional footnotes about this and every other play that we cover in the podcast available to our patrons. Patrons also enjoy early access to our sister podcast, The Play Review, in which Jody Rylett and I share our views on current productions on the London stage. To become a patron, please visit our website at theplaypodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so as not to miss an episode. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.